Source Nation. Join us now for Family Mix Mondays with licensed professional counselor Jaketra Bryant. Tune in as Jaketra shows the different dynamics that make up family. Whether you represent the nuclear family, single parent, extended, grandparent, or blended family, Jaketra has tips and advice designed to strengthen your family structure. Source Nation, here is your host, Jaketra Bryant.
Well, good evening, SRN Television. I am your host of Family Mix Mondays, Jaketra Bryant, and I want to welcome you as we continue our series of promoting wellness for our parents, especially, and our families and our children. And so we've had some really great talks this month, actually. I've learned a lot, and I really hope that you too have learned a lot and that you are picking up some tips when it comes to like exercise, picking up some tips that we learned from our nurse last week on getting out together and just exercising with your family and talking about some history that might have been a cause of what you have eaten or a cause of something hereditary, and having these engaging conversations. So I really, really hope that somewhere in this series, you found your family. And so we're going to keep that going, actually. And so before I jump into more of the series, I want to mention, if you are interested in advertising with SRN Television, the contact information is Kathleen1971@gmail.com. That's Kathleen1971@gmail.com. And you can also contact TracyJeffCoach@gmail.com. And they'll be glad to answer any questions or get you started with advertising on SRN Television. And so I want to stop and thank our sponsors, Zulina Health and Wellness and Fitness, Paper to Film Productions, Revolution, and Renovations. And so thank you for your sponsorship. And so before we, we're actually going to get started jumping in with our conversation. And so I like to do a little homework and just like look up why I'm doing this series, what's important, how it relates to the people that I service, and how it relates to my family. And there was a lot of stuff out there when it came to the health of your mind and your body and spirit, and really taking a look at like the impact of what you eat, what you do, and what you don't do, or what you don't know, and how it impacts the children that are watching you and how it impacts you as a person. And so tonight, I want to keep that going and talk about our diet, talk about what we put in our mouth, from what we drink to what we eat, and to all those good things that we like to crave. Like, I want to talk about those things because I got a whole lot with me. And so we have Leslie Knapp, and she is a registered and licensed dietitian in the state of Georgia. She is a registered dietitian for psychological and health services and Panther Dining at Georgia State University. Leslie also owns and operates Napples Nutrition, a private practice which offers an individual nutrition counseling and medical nutrition therapy. And she has experience working with a wide range of nutrition needs, including chronic disease states, eating disorders, food allergies, and food insecurities. Leslie's food philosophy is individualized and evidence-based, with a focus on consistency. She is passionate about finding feasible and effective nutrition goals to motivate individuals to meet their nutrition needs. And I know her from around university, and I hear so many great things about her. So I think she's perfect for y'all tonight. And so Leslie, hello, and thank you so much for joining tonight.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me. A pleasure to be here.
Yes. So tell Source Nation more about you and any new things that you may have going on, or just any tips that you have first.
Absolutely. So like you mentioned, I'm a registered dietitian, so I work a lot with food and nutrition. And as the list mentioned, it spans with a lot of different topics. So anywhere from just general healthy eating to nutrition therapy for diabetes or heart disease, eating disorders, all that type of thing. So a lot of experience there. I spend a lot of my time working with the lovely student body at Georgia State University. And as you mentioned, I have a private practice as well, where I work a lot with patients and clients with diabetes and heart disease as well. So that's kind of a thing that I do.
Yeah. So excellent person for tonight. So, Leslie, when I was thinking of this series, I had no idea of the personal impact it would have on me. That in the midst of this, I've hired a trainer who checks my diet and yeah, like just went in on me last night. Like I was like a little kid, like, okay, okay. And I was just so embarrassed. But I was like, you know what? Like, I need that. And he just kept saying, well, like, if you don't watch what you eat, then what are you teaching your son? And so I was just like, oh man, like what an excellent point. So that's what I want to start with tonight. I want to start with these parents and what are we teaching our children? Oh my goodness. I have a 10-year-old who's all in my face about everything.
Yeah.
And so and so he watches everything I do and say.
Mm-hmm.
So like how important is our wellness when it comes to the sake of like our children watching?
Absolutely. I mean, we learn so much from watching our parents, whether it's just food or how they maintain a household or the work ethic that they might have. So I think it's huge for parents to lead by example and show their kids. But you made a good point. There's a lot of guilt and negativity around how I eat and what's okay and what's not. And I try to really encourage not only just parents, but children to think of it more from a what can I eat? What is more fun for me to include instead of I can't have this, this is bad, and I should feel guilty about everything I do. So I think that that's a good place for a lot of families to start on putting that positive spin and thoughtfulness around what are some cool things we can add into our week, our day to be healthier that don't feel like they're too much to do, but that we also don't have to have this extreme guilt around, right?
Yeah.
And nutrition comes with a lot of that. And so I really try to work to break down some of those barriers, right? So you mentioned a great point, like parents leading. And it starts a lot with a parent's education, right? Not all parents are also raised with a nutrition education book that says this is what you need to feed your kids, this is how you do it, right? But I think that there's a lot to do around creating and learning together as a family. And I think that encourages not only parents and kids to be excited about nutrition, but also a way that you can bring it in the household that can build family bonding and make it a more positive all over experience.
Yeah, that's a good point. It sure is. And that's something that I want to like make sure that we're promoting is one, the education component and the inclusiveness together. And I think it will break a lot of generational cycles that go on. And so speaking of the educational point, like I know that I am not that person that like looks at cookbooks or was even in the kitchen when my mom was cooking. I wanted to go outside when I was a kid. So how can a person gain knowledge of like what's healthy, what's not healthy? What is this trans fat? What is this? Like just the basic education of maybe reading the labels.
Yes. Yeah. I think it starts a lot with whole foods. And I think that that's a common phrase that comes up a lot in news and media right now. But when we think of whole foods, like the less ingredients is usually a good rule of thumb. But if we think about the grocery store, right, we have the produce section that has your fruits and vegetables, right? Most of those are just fruits and vegetables, which makes them a whole food. There's not a lot of different things added to them. Even things like your meats, like chickens and beef, things that aren't having things added to them. That's always a good place to start. And so a clean nutrition label is always a good thing to look for. There's a lot of talk about, sometimes we do grocery store tours, right? And it's like, do the perimeter of the grocery store because the things in the middle tend to be a little bit more of those packaged foods, right? So we always encourage to try to include more of those whole foods. But if we don't have a lot of knowledge on how to prepare them to taste well, we often end up buying a lot of those prepackaged foods that take a little bit less knowledge to prepare, right? It's like read the box, right? So I think a good place to start for families, if we have a little less cooking knowledge, maybe still buy some of those foods to have on the table, but maybe just start with one new recipe a week. And together we work on creating that recipe, right? So the kids or the parents sit down, let's pick something new that might not be too like high level of difficulty, but to incorporate some things we're familiar with eating and play around with that because that's the best way to learn. It's hard to sit down and say, here's how you cook, go for it, right?
Yeah.
I think trying to practice and play around and learn as a family can be really fun. And they don't all turn out wonderfully, all the recipes the first time around. But I think it's a really fun experience to get kids and parents excited about making something new and trying to include more nutrition.
Yeah.
Some of the hot spots on like a nutrition label, if that's what we're reading, there's always fats, calories, sodium, sugars, carbohydrates, all of those things. And so if we think about those food groups, a lot of our calories come from carbohydrates. Okay, so carbohydrates, things like your breads, rice, cereals, pasta, granola, potatoes, right? And those are a lot of foods that we eat pretty regularly. So thinking
Mm-hmm.
about the plate, if we have the carbohydrates, what else can we add to it to balance out? And that's where we really need to branch out some of those proteins, fruits, and vegetables, right?
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, because we often start with, okay, if I'm thinking of what I'm going to make for dinner, and we think of proteins a lot and we think of carbohydrates. Like I'm going to have
Mm-hmm.
pasta with sauce, but that's sometimes as
Yeah.
far as we get, right? So if we think about proteins like your animal proteins, of course, chicken, turkey, fish, eggs, beans, nuts, and seeds also fall into this category, and some of your more plant-based proteins. So thinking about what can I balance out some of those carbohydrates with proteins, but also those delicious fruits and vegetables that have so much benefit for our health and chronic disease prevention as well.
That's a really good point. I know like I never was taught like about looking at labels. It wasn't until I started like looking at like all these weight loss programs and someone was like telling me that I had to count calories. So that's the only thing that I started looking at is because I needed to reduce my calories. So I needed to pay attention to like how many calories. And then from there I
Exactly.
started trying to calculate, well, wait, this has less calories, but this has this many sugars. And then it really got interesting. I was like, this is really a lot of work to
It is.
understand what it means with sugars, what does it mean with fats, and what does calories mean in terms of what might be good and what might not be good. Because I can
Yeah.
pick up an item for my son, and it's like a 90-calorie those Quaker bars,
Yeah.
and a lot of those kids love those. And then
Mhm.
really like maybe the grams of sugar or carbs are high, and then I'm thinking I've gotten him a really great snack, but because I'm like, oh yeah, 90 calories for me, yeah. But looking at like what does that mean for like our kids, or what does that mean for what we're trying to do nutrition wise to keep our like physical and mental and spiritual health.
Yes. And that makes me think a lot of sugar, right? So I think we eat, so carbohydrates and sugar kind of fall into a similar category. Okay, right? So, but a lot of our carbohydrate packaged items like granola bars, right, or the Quaker bars or cereals have a lot of added sugar in it, right? And for kids especially, sugar is something that is difficult to have a lot of, right? It creates these kind of highs and lows of energy. And when we think of a child wanting to focus in school or sit in their chair every day and listen to a teacher talk and learn, if we're being pumped full of sugar from breakfast with cereal and like a chocolate milk into our snack with sugar, lunch with sugar, it becomes this kind of roller coaster ride, if you will, of energy.
Right.
So working on finding if we are going to do something a little bit more packaged, like maybe the Quaker bar, is there something I can pair with it or substitute with it to make a little bit more nutrient density for it? For example, maybe we do an apple and peanut butter, right? That's a quick, easy snack, right? We can easily grab an apple, make sure it's washed, of course, right? Grab a little pack of peanut butter with it, and we get a little bit of protein from the peanut butter, a little bit of carbohydrate and energy source from the apple, and we have a really great pairing snack that's going to promote focus, satiety, and good energy for our kid or ourselves, right? So
That's a
thinking
good
about
idea.
those different snack categories, you bring up a great point. So fruits and vegetables fit really well into that snack category, but I especially think of portable fruits like bananas, apples, those really easy peel oranges. If we're in a hurry, that's easy to grab with us, take on the road and eat and have a good, snack that has a little bit more fiber, a more balanced amount of sugar, and a lot of vitamins and minerals that we would benefit from versus maybe a packaged granola bar with less calories, but a lot of those other things that might not be as nutrient beneficial.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I think like as you were talking, I just kept thinking that's probably my issue with this trainer. So not that he's not great, because I think he is awesome. But like when he was fussing about the food, I was thinking of like, I thought I had a pretty all right week. So he's like, carbs, carbs, carbs.
Yes.
Like you ate all these carbs.
Carb control and restricted carbs is another big nutrition topic, right? But I think we've become a little distorted with how much carb is actually reasonable, right?
Yeah.
I always, not to put on blast, but some of the more like Italian main chain restaurants, right, I think of, where you get this huge bowl of pasta that probably has 6 to 8 servings of pasta in it. And then we get like chicken and a heavy sauce on top. And you can see where this carb heavy focus comes from, right? Or we get a sandwich with chips, a foot-long sandwich nonetheless, right? So I think it's not about low carb, it's about appropriate carb. And so if we're thinking of carbohydrate servings, a good rule of thumb is about a fist size being 1 serving. So of rice, of pasta, about this size of bread. I know it doesn't come quite like a fist, right? But the smaller slice of bread, even your cereals and things like that. And not that you have to stick to this 1 serving, but usually about 1 to 2 fist size is a pretty good amount per meal. Right. And if we're thinking snack, about 1 fist would be a good assessment. Right. So if we think about some other meals, you could easily pop on 4 to 5 servings of carbohydrate and we get heavy carb and we're not balancing it out with some of those other foods. So maybe thinking about visualizing the fist size of how much carb. And again, like I mentioned before, what can I bring it back with on the plate to make it a little bit more balanced and rounded of a meal? So we're not just carbs. Yeah.
I know that's such a great idea. And I know I've always been taught like paying attention to this number, but you're right. Like I've never been taught like, well, what is that? Or what does that look like on the plate?
Exactly.
And so I think it's a really good point, because when you're a kid, I think about like this in context of my son. And I remember my mom, like she went to have lunch with him. She was like, of course the boy is hungry. They only give him a little bit like that at school. And then so like she's always complaining that he's like still hungry. But then in reality, I think that is a very conducive proportion. And I think it's us. So I think
it can be us, right? The stomach can adjust with size with what we eat, right? So if we're eating larger meals, our stomach wants larger meals because that feels more filling. But if we also think about the benefits of the food groups and how those fill us up. So carbohydrates are the body's first source of energy, right? They break down into immediate energy or glucose, right? And then they're used to make energy. So they go really quickly through the body and are processed quickly. Right? So if we eat a plate full of carbohydrates, like a just pasta meal, yes, the body uses that up and breaks it down quickly, but then an hour later or so, we're not satisfied or full because it doesn't stay with us. The 2 important ingredients for kind of maintaining fullness or satiety, as we refer to it, are whole grain carbohydrates. So your complex carbohydrates, those are things that have whole wheat and whole grain in them. Right? Or brown rice or whole wheat pasta. Those are really important. And then also protein. Protein is one of your slowest digesting nutrients, so it can really stay in the body and keep the stomach full and satisfied. So I mentioned that pairing earlier, right? The carbohydrate and protein for snack. That applies really well to a meal too. Even for breakfast, right? We often just eat a bowl of cereal and maybe a little bit of milk, but maybe adding an egg on the side, right? Or a handful of nuts and dried fruit, adding a little bit more of that protein roundedness and fiber helps really keep the body full and satisfied. So your son's not hungry after a meal, right?
That's a really good point.
Portion controlled. Yeah. And then work in those different food groups.
Yeah, I like that. So how do we, Leslie, and as parents, gaining this knowledge of like how to read the back, like definitely getting it for ourselves so we can model it. How can we then introduce this into the family. And it's something I was thinking about, like even with the interview and just also like with my son. And because the trainer just really keeps saying like, your son is watching for your son.
Yes.
He's gonna get me if he knows I keep on doing that with the show. But he really keeps saying, and I keep thinking, well, how am I gonna like let my son know that I'm about to switch some things in the household with what he's drinking, what he's eating, like portions, all that. Like, how do you come and introduce like this new nutrition?
I think starting small is a huge place to be. It's hard for people, especially kids, overnight to say, okay, so we're getting rid of everything with sugar in the house and we're going to eat all this good food and no more like sodas and all those things. So I think a good place to start is just with small steps. Whatever you think your child specifically might be more apt to adjusting. For example, maybe instead of having juice with dinner that has a lot of extra sugar, we're all switching to water, right? And start that kind of slow movement. Or maybe we think about getting the child involved. What kind of protein and vegetable are you into having on your plate at dinner, right? We can have them maybe select one that sounds good and start adding that to the plate so they have a little of that visual diversity without saying, all right, half a plate vegetables today, just a little bit of spaghetti, right, to balance that out. So I think it's always helpful to start small. With nutrition labels, I mean, it's hard for a kid to want to read nutrition labels, let alone a parent to educate their kid to read nutrition labels. But, and I think, as you mentioned before, it can get pretty tedious to like read labels on everything and measure them out. So if I'm thinking of a meal, a good rule of thumb, and this is a great resource like MyPlate.gov has that plate that's split up into 4 sections. And it has your protein and carbs, your carbs being about that fist-size serving, protein being about a palm size, and then it has half the plate fruits and vegetables or all vegetables, right? So I like to recommend half the plate vegetables, especially for dinner. But maybe even sitting down with the kids and thinking, okay, here's the different food groups that we want to aim for. Do you have any input on some that you'd want to include? And start subtly adding in more vegetables, balancing out those carbohydrates, and adding some really good proteins, I think is a great start. But even just getting them excited about it instead of say, hey, guess what? We're going to eat healthy, right? Which again has some of that stigma. But maybe just start subtly changing some of your habits, right? So adding extra vegetables and saying, man, these vegetables taste good tonight, and having some on the kids' plate and encouraging our kids to include more of those when they're eating. That can be a really soft, subtle way of adding it in without saying, you got to eat your vegetables tonight. You're not getting up from the table until you do so, right? Because who wants to hear that as a kid?
I know, right?
So I think it's
that's what
maybe
they said to me.
picking something, even if your family's open to it, getting them involved, like, hey, here's some really healthy changes we could make. Drink more water, eat a more balanced dinner, add more vegetables. What sounds like something that you'd be interested in trying, and how can we substitute those things in? I think when we think of kids, we sometimes tend to assume that they're not going to be interested in making some of those changes, right? Or be on board with being healthier. But I think if we can teach them to remove some of that stigma and not make it seem like it has to be like a huge chore, like reading nutrition labels all the time, they might be a little bit more excited to be a part of it, right? And I know not every kid is that easy, right? But some of those soft, subtle changes, I think, would be a huge recommendation for them to get a little bit more excited in what you're doing.
I like that. I like that idea. That's what I'm going to try with Christian. Definitely try it with Christian. I think it's something that's long overdue. I've tried now, like, speaking of like those small subtle changes, like he's at camp and he has to take his water bottle. And so I'll now say, hey, Christian, make sure that you refill this one up after you finish before I pick you up. And so I've given him like this small subtle goal of now you have to drink 2 bottled waters. And the bottled water is like, you know, those like little kid thermostat type of thing. So I don't even know if he's drinking 10 ounces. Yeah. But for I think a small kid, I read that they actually don't need like 100 ounces like we're drinking, or a gallon of water like we're drinking. Correct. That he's fine. And so that's like my subtle goal that I've been trying to incorporate with him, being more mindful, like to drink more water.
Yes, that water is one of the, I wouldn't say hidden because it's obviously a nutrition recommendation, but we often focus so much on food. water is one of the number one best things we can do for our body. It helps maintain balance, not only a body function, but good digestion, helps promote sustained energy, right? And then feeling dehydrated isn't the most fun thing. It's headaches, muscle aches, fatigue, right? But we often, or I often encourage people to think about drinking water as more of a marathon than a sprint, right? So starting with a glass of water when you wake up in the morning and starting and continuing that throughout the day. We often wake up dehydrated because we're not drinking water throughout the night while we're sleeping, most of us, right? So we're already dehydrated. And then if we wait till like lunchtime to have our first glass of water, we're less likely to be able to increase that hydration level. So I really encourage people, start when you wake up, have a glass, like a half a glass, whatever feels comfortable while you're getting ready in the morning or with your breakfast, and then take that water bottle with you to camp or with you to work and continue drinking throughout the day, because that's the best way to get your hydration levels balanced and the body happy. And we've talked a little bit about food choice, right? And hydration or dehydration can sometimes dictate foods that we're craving or how hungry we are. Sometimes that's just dehydration telling us we're hungry, right?
Yeah.
So I really encourage people to kind of try to maintain and include hydration. And I think it's a kind of easy step for a lot of families to just start towards, right? Having the water out on the table versus a juice or a milk. And I'm not saying those are terrible and bad and never have them, but if we're used to that and we just keep going to that, then we're not going to get that water added in. So I think that's a good tip, is just having water on the table at meals or in the morning at breakfast, and having it with us throughout the day.
Yeah, so I definitely keep hearing like this theme about like basically like the subtle things like you mentioned, like having those subtle moments of the water. And if you think about it from a restaurant, a lot of the restaurants that are fine dining, or in the category of the $2 signs, often have the table, often have water immediately brought out to you. So that is something that you can begin to do. And I think that's a really good point to even notice that, like, oh, that's something that we're trying to incorporate, like everyone to start with water, and let's like look at that. And so okay, so definitely that's something of just incorporating. And you spoke about it briefly earlier, and I know for myself, well, not you need to speak about this part, but the point I'll make later. But I know for myself that I need to get a lot better with eating certain foods like sweets. I swear they call my name when I'm the most stressed. It's so weird. And so like
I promise
it's
you
like
are not alone on that. That is a common thing.
Yeah. And so I want to know like what is up with that? Like what's kind of going on with this like the correlation with stress and the correlation with wanting to eat. And then literally like, that is something again, like our kids are watching, our other family members are watching. And I believe that's that combination of that holistic wellness.
Yes. This is a great point to bring in too with some of the mind and body, right? This is a huge connection. And I think there's two types of people in the world. There's those that eat when they're stressed, and there's those that don't eat when they're stressed. And neither of those are really a great option, right? But obviously it can increase and kind of snowball into some dangerous areas, right? If we overeat, obesity, health concerns, chronic disease. And if we're not eating and we're stressed, obviously eating disorder, anorexia, extreme weight loss can happen as well. So when we think about emotional eating or eating when we're stressed, I think it comes a lot of this society seems to have food as a reward, right? We think, oh, you did a great job today, let's go get ice cream. Or our treat today is going to be McDonald's. And not that it's terrible to reward ourselves, but we think about food and it starts to develop this kind of emotional tie of, ooh, I deserve this because I did something good today, or I'm stressed, so you know what, I'm going to have that cookie because I deserve it, right? And I think we start getting in that routine and it becomes a habit, right? It's like, oh, I'm stressed. I know this donut made me feel a little bit better initially, right? Last time, so I'm going to choose that again. And you know pretty well, right, about the behavioral patterns that we can kind of create. So I think it's not as easy to say just tell yourself to stop doing it. We know that, right? But I think there's some things we can talk about that can help prevent it, right? So a first rule of thumb, we mentioned hydration, right? Cravings can be a result of dehydration. So making sure that you're fueling the body regularly with water can help decrease some of those cravings even during a stressful time. Another thing to think about is how frequently are we eating? I know if I've had a stressful day and you go all day without eating, by the time I get home, probably my food choice and the amount of food I'm going to eat is not going to be the best option, right? So if we can make sure that we're eating at least 3 meals a day, trying to maintain that balance even when stressed, we're less likely to have some of those cravings occur throughout the day and have those weaker moments where we might choose some of those foods, right? My third thought around cravings and eating is the concept of mindfulness versus mindlessness. Oftentimes when we're stressed and we're eating, we kind of tune out a little bit from the experience, right? Like you might finish half a bag of chips and be like, what just happened? I hardly remember eating it, right? Or cookies, right? And so, yes, and we're all guilty of it, right? But if we're not thinking of what we're putting in our mouth and not allowing the brain to register that and not giving the body time to register that, then we're less likely to be able to A, prevent the craving, B, eat less during that craving, and C, even be aware of how much we're actually putting in our body at that time, right? So this theory of mindfulness is a lot about, first of all, taking a step back and connecting with the mind and body for a second. Am I hungry? When have I last eaten? Am I hydrated? Before I just reach for my bag of cookies, right? Yeah. And a little bit of that too is the stress management side, right? Being able to work on some healthy techniques to decompress a little bit besides just food. But that's a different show, I think. But that being said, even just taking, if we're going to have this craving and we want to eat, taking the bag of cookies and setting some out, like the serving size out of the bag or a bag of chips, out into a bowl or on a paper towel so we can visually see what we're going to eat instead of reaching in a bag or reaching in a box where we start to lose some of that mindfulness around what we're having. And then another big tip, and I know it sounds kind of lame, but is actually chewing, right? Taking the time to chew and process the flavors we're having, what we're eating. Do I enjoy it? What do I like about this? And we're less likely to overeat if we're slowing down, chewing, and registering what we're having. And that's a tip that I notice a lot of us miss out on because we do this like quick eating thing a lot, especially when we're stressed. It's kind of like just, I want to eat it and I want it now. And then we really disconnect from that actual eating experience. And I think that ends up affecting us negatively in a lot of ways with overeating.
I agree. I know as you were talking, I was just like, guilty of that too, guilty of that part too. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I need to really work on some stuff. And so, and I kind of with just the theme of like promoting the wellness part, I realized that the more that I do kind of have this stress eating and sweets call my name, that my son is like, oh, can I have some ice cream too? And then now, not only do I now have a kid who wants like ice cream and a snow blizzard from Dairy Queen, but he also, now I got also that I've spent double money. And so then it becomes another issue, like my finance. So it's not working, Leslie. None of it's working for me. That's my take home. None of it's working for me.
Okay. Well, you bring up a good point, right? Like, my son sees me doing it. Now he wants ice cream. And what happens with this kind of like sweet cycle, if you will, our taste buds become more prone to wanting that, right? So it's like if I'm eating sweets regularly or all day, the body's going to be like, yeah, where are my sweets at, right? Like I'm craving that. I want more. So maybe a couple ideas or tips is starting with something else first, although it might not sound as appetizing, but having a sip of water, maybe saying, hey, today I'm going to try some fresh strawberries, right? First, taking the time to eat those a little bit and then give yourself about 10 minutes and assess, okay, do we still want to go get that ice cream? And if so, can we share one? and sit together and eat and enjoy, or we get 2 small ones, whatever works better. And take the time to kind of enjoy and taste, maybe even talk about it. Like, ooh, I really like the texture of the Hershey's in my Blizzard today, whatever that might be. And I know it sounds kind of lame, but we're more aware and more conscious. And I think anytime that we can be more thoughtful, it's going to help us in the long run.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I never thought about that. Like I never ever thought about that. And I think that's like my problem because in the midst I'm guilty. And so I'm focused more on, and as a therapist, I'm so focused on my thoughts that I don't think I'm paying attention to like what is my body saying? And then that actually is, again, like you mentioned, stress management. And it's hard to not to say stress management to wellness to all these like mind body that they all connect.
They're
Really
interconnected 100%. Yes. And I think if we can find the mindfulness and awareness to even just start with the day that is upon us in the morning and saying, okay, today I want to be kind of self-checked in, right? I want to be aware. But if you start feeling that craving, instead of just doing the impulse of choosing that item and going for it, if we can take a minute to be thoughtful and say, okay, maybe I could go for a walk around the block first, or have some water first, or maybe I call a friend first, and let the body figure it out for a minute. And if that craving's still there, then try the mindfulness techniques I mentioned, like slowing down and including it. But we often just have that trigger response to go get that food item, and we don't even we're not even there until we get the food, if that makes sense. We just kind of reach for it sporadically. So if we can be a little bit more mindful and thoughtful, I think that's a huge way that we can be more successful nutritionally, and teach our kids too that they don't need to just reach for the tub of ice cream in the freezer if they're feeling stressed out. Maybe we choose to go for a walk, or maybe we play a game as a family really quickly together and let ourselves kind of regroup and relax, then see about that ice cream, if you will, right?
That's a really good point. Oh my goodness, I am like, yes, and we'll be incorporating that. And so like, I want to make sure that we also talk about like those recipes you mentioned. Well, not recipes, but just kind of incorporating our families in, because I think that part of the reason that I'm not as educated by it, and I've had to do all these yo-yo diets and things like that, is because there is no education, and there was not a time where I was in the kitchen. One, I wasn't very interested, and I probably should have been now that I look at it, but a little bit more interested in like what, like maybe the togetherness part. So are there some cute little recipes or some cute ideas of some family time together of some recipes or something?
Absolutely. I think when we think of kid-friendly recipes, they don't always have to be like chicken fingers and fries, right? We can do like a finger food or something colorful or something that's exciting for kids to prepare. Things like even just like a grilled chicken lettuce wrap with some good like veggies added in. It's fun to eat it. It's like a taco. It has a lot of good colors and visuals in it. And it's a nice twist, and you can do it on like simple foods that they already like without getting too carried away with a new recipe. Even doing like a lot of like pizzas, homemade pizzas, getting like a whole wheat flatbread or something like that, and letting the kids choose their toppings, and trying to encourage some more of those vegetable options, or a lighter cheese or something like that is a great way to just get kids encouraged and involved. And I think it doesn't always have to be like a steamed chicken and broccoli recipe, right? Or excuse me, a baked chicken and broccoli recipe to be healthy. I think with kids, especially, they're growing. They need a lot of different nutrients. So just trying to work in some different foods that they may or may not eat regularly is a good place to start. So if they're chicken lovers, the internet is a lovely place to go, but even like chicken lettuce wraps, or maybe we do some egg cups for breakfast, like with some veggies in it. Just give them a little variety. I think kids eat the same things, right? We get the same like macaroni and cheese at a restaurant, or we get the same kind of cheeseburger situation. So just thinking outside the box for some things that the kids are interested in eating. When we think of snack foods, that's a really fun way. Like, I know when I was a kid, and this is still a favorite, like celery with a little bit of peanut butter and some raisins on top. Like, that was the funnest snack for us when we were kids, you know? So getting things that are visually appealing, lots of colors, and getting those kids involved in having some different nutrients. Like I said, even letting them pick a recipe, like say, here's the internet, let's look over some ideas. What sounds good to you to try this week? And have them go to the store with you, pick out the food. I know timing is a thing for everybody. It's not like we have a leisurely day to go grocery shopping and cook all the time. But you mentioned the nutrition education that you might not have gotten, and a lot of us might not have gotten when we were kids. Take the kids with you to the grocery store. Let them get acclimated. Let them learn as kids of ways that they can be more proactive for their nutrition when they get older later, right? And some of that is even simple preparation of food, like how to cook an egg, how to cook pasta, how to cook chicken, right? There's students I meet with at Georgia State that have no idea how to do that, and they're in their 20s, right? So I think just getting the kids in the kitchen, it's not like they have to be there all day, every day, but maybe we have one night of family cooking, and let's go to the grocery store and get the ingredients, and we try this fun recipe and see how it works.
That's a really good idea. That's something definitely I'll be incorporating. And I know like you mentioned before, well, off the air you mentioned about like the timing of food. And I definitely want to like get some education about that and the appropriate time, because as parents, it is go, 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 go. Here's the next agenda. We've checked one task off. We're running to the store here. And you will get caught up in the drive-through a lot.
Absolutely.
So, like, I guess what would be a good strategy to avoid drive-through moments and actually maybe timing your food appropriately?
Absolutely. I think 2 points come to mind with that. One is, if we don't eat regularly, like every 3 to 4 hours, and I'm not saying a full meal, but a snack or something in our system, we're more likely to get increasingly hungry. And then we're more likely to stop on the way home or get something out of convenience because we're hungry. And we're like, forget it, I'm not going to go to the grocery store today and cook. It's going to take too long, right? So if we can kind of fuel ourselves regularly, breakfast, so important, having something within an hour or so of after waking up, a couple hours later or so, having a nice snack, lunch, snack, dinner, that's a really good routine to get in. And it does take some adjustment personally, or for each individual, I should say, of how much to have at each of those snacks and meals. But if we can just get in the thoughtfulness of having some more consistent intake to help with energy, to help with satiety and fullness, we're less likely to do more of those impulsive choices, right? And also less of those cravings that we were talking about too.
Yeah.
And then the other side, as parents, we're inevitably going to end up in a drive-through at some point during the week. That's probably true for most people. But how can I plan a little bit? If it is a night of cooking, can I make double the amount and have that leftover for the next day? Can I plan on having some easy fruits to grab, or some nice yogurts in the fridge that are easy to pack in my bag and run out the door to have for my kids a couple hours from now? So it's not as easy to say there's one thing, but I think being thoughtful and planning a little bit ahead at the meal or the store when you're there, what can I do for the next one, instead of just what do I need just today for this meal?
That's a really good point. And I find that like what you're saying, that is something that I found very helpful when I did. Like today, my son was so the new school that he's at for the summertime, I really appreciate them. Like this summer, they're going to have like cooking class. And so I was wondering, because I'm like, you had to pay extra to have like a cooking class and technology and basketball. Yes. So I'm like, wait, where's the class? But then when I talked to the director, and I need to get my priorities together. when I talked to the lady, I was like, hey, just kind of wondering, cooking classes, are they underway? And she was like, yeah, they are actually. She says, but right now what we're working on is healthy eating choices. And she was like, it makes no difference if we begin introducing cooking if you don't understand what would be a good choice to actually prepare. She was like, we can teach anyone cookies, but she was like, but we want to teach them healthy eating choices. And I was like, oh man, okay, never mind. Take your time. So,
But that's also where a lot of that balance that we talked about at the beginning comes into play. Instead of just thinking of, can I just make these maybe baked potatoes? What can I add with it that's going to add a little dimension and balance? And the thing is, it does take a little extra energy at first to think up some of those things, and it is a little trial and error. But if you can give it a good run of a couple weeks, eventually it starts becoming a new habit, right? Or a new behavior that makes it easy for us, not always easy, but easier for us to feed our family, to nourish our kids, and we all start getting in a different groove, right? And so I think the hardest thing with nutrition is the kickstart, because a lot of the things seem like a lot. It seems like a lot of change, but if we can just start with those subtle changes, even one recipe a week and making enough for 2 meals, right? That's one quick way to have food ready for your family, make sure it's a good balanced meal, and one last stop at the drive-through. And sometimes it's
yeah.
just starting with those small steps.
Man, I love it. Oh my goodness, this has been so. Hopefully, everyone watching or that will watch later grab some stuff. If not, I got it all. So
Okay.
our family will be good. So, but I want you to mention that website. You mentioned that we can actually begin seeing the different plates, size, and that. I thought that was a really good resource. So,
Yes, so it's a government resource. It's MyPlate. I think it's myplate.gov. I'm sorry, I can never remember if it's .gov or .com. But if you just Google MyPlate, and it's a government-run website, and they have not only the plate and what that looks like, but they have a lot of really great top 10 tip sheets on there. Things like how to be more active, how to eat on a budget, all kinds of stuff. Really great resources for families, all age groups. They even have men and women specific nutrient needs and things like that on there. It's a great resource for families to use. And I believe they also have recipes and cooking tips and things on there too. So it's a great resource. I would definitely recommend checking it out.
oh, good, good. I'm definitely going to. That is something I will. And so, Leslie, any other final encouraging words or just tips that you think are important to mention before we?
Absolutely. I think a good thought moving forward with nutrition to those listeners that are motivated to do so, instead of getting overwhelmed by making all the change of exercise, diet, drinking more water, and doing all these wonderful things, find one thing to start with that feels a little bit easier to do. Don't try to choose the first thing that feels like you have to move a mountain to do it, right? Whether it's going for a 10-minute walk on your lunch break, or drinking one more glass of water a day, or cooking one meal a week, whatever those small things are that feel good, just start there and allow yourself to make that a behavior, and then start moving towards some of those things that might seem a little bit more challenging. Nutrition doesn't have to be, intense and completely difficult and full of guilt and shame and don't do this. It can be a lot of, these are some fun things, easy things that I can do to make myself feel better, and I notice feeling better, and that'll help self-motivate a little bit to promote that change, and your kids notice that too. So I think it's good for the whole family.
Yeah, this has been so good. I thank you. So, how can anyone get in touch with you later if they have follow-up questions or just want to just follow you on any type of
Absolutely.
social sites?
Best way to reach me is by email. So my email is my last name, KNAPP, and then les0@gmail.com. Unfortunately, I don't do a ton of social media. I'm starting to work on getting on that train, but if they have any specific questions, email is definitely a good route for me.
Yeah, I know. I had to catch up too.
Yeah.
It's just moving without us. It's a
It's
lot.
moving quickly, and for the older crowd that I'm a part of, it's not something that always comes naturally, but it is a wonderful source. We do a lot of social media, obviously through Georgia State, on food and nutrition and things like that, but a little less on my own time, but I will work on it. That's something maybe I can start incorporating.
I know this has been so good. So Leslie, I definitely thank you for this. And
Thank you for
so
having me.
Yes, and so SRN television, I really hope this is something that you've enjoyed. I pulled so many pointers, and so I love what Leslie said. Start small and just bring those subtle things in, and incorporate food and incorporate like waters and exercise, and just being more mindful of that. Like mindful. If you don't remember anything else, mindfulness is something to definitely pull apart with this. And so again, if you are interested in advertising, then please contact Kathleen1971 or Tracy Jeff Coach at gmail.com. I just thought about Kathleen1971@gmail.com or TracyJeffco@gmail.com, and they'll be glad to get you started on any advertisement. And please join me next week as I end my series of promoting wellness with our parents and our families and our children as we continue this. And I'm going to hopefully get some exercise tips in so we can like get moving also and really just have a year where we are breaking generational cycles with health, wellness, and the mental side of things. And so thank you so much for joining me, and tune back in for Family Mix Mondays with Jaketra Bryant.
Get at me for feature.